Welcome to the latest episode of the FedTalks, brought to you today by JTI UK. We're going to be looking at the big issue of illicit tobacco in the UK and the growing black market and the effect that has on local independent retailers, their stores and their communities. We're joined by Stacey, who is Communications Manager at JTI UK. Dill's going to be discussing the It Costs More Than You Think campaign by JTI, which is designed to help independent retailers fight back against the illicit trade. We also have Rohan Pike with us, who is a law enforcement expert with years of experience fighting against illicit tobacco in Australia. So thanks for joining me, guys. Dill, let's start with you. How much of a problem is illicit tobacco in the UK and how is it affecting retailers?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me here today. It's a big problem. You know, we go up and down the country, we speak to a huge number of retailers, and every one of them, when we discuss the illegal tobacco problem in the UK, raise it as a very high concern within their own communities that they they serve so admirably. And, you know, from what we understand and what we see from even HMRC's own records, year-on-year increases of reports of illegal trade within communities and society at large over the last 5-6 years since 2020. They estimate the problem to be in excess of £2.2 billion worth of lost revenue to the Treasury, which, you know, by our own kind of calculations, we expect or anticipate could be actually much more than that. So, you know, it is a huge concern, and it's something that, you know, the It Costs More Than You Think campaign has absolutely been set up to tackle, to open the engagement to our retail partners and to the communities themselves, as well as an opportunity for our government officials to go on and actually get real-time information, data about the scale of the problem within their own constituencies and give them the tools to actually go out and actually spot illegal trade in their market, because we know the data, we know the numbers, and we speak to retailers. We know the problem is significant, but it's about giving other communities and other areas, other stakeholders, the tools to be able to understand what is actually happening within their own society.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dill. And Rohan, you've seen over in Australia firsthand the impact that this illicit trade has on honest retailers. So is that something we can see move into the UK and affect honest retailers and legitimate retailers over here?
Oh, I certainly hope not, Nathan. But I'm here to warn the UK that it may actually happen. So if you don't know what's happening in Australia, it's a complete debacle. Poor government policy has invited organised crime groups in. In terms of the illicit trade, it's 80% of the tobacco market. It's over 95% of the vape market. And the violence, there's $12 billion of revenue that's been lost. It used to be $16 billion, now it's down to $4 billion. But the violence you've probably heard about, it's called the tobacco wars in Australia, where organised crime groups are fighting each other. It's led to murders. It's led to widespread extortion right across the tobacco industry, and hundreds of firebombings that are happening virtually every day. So it's scarcely believable that. And the effect that that's had on the retailing take or revenue from tobacco is down 90%. So they're only getting 10% of what they used to get. They are getting robbed for the legal product. So the value of the legal product is so extreme that's sitting behind them, behind the counter, that's encouraged both opportunists and organised robberies of their stores. And one thing that's probably hasn't quite hit yet here is the insurance costs. So they've quadrupled, if not quintupled in Australia. And that's making many of these businesses economically unviable. So they're pulling out in large numbers, which is a shame, but they just can't afford to go on. The other thing that's hasn't quite hit here is the security aspect of retailing shops, where some of our high streets and shopping centres look like East LA now. We've got bars, we've got shutters, we've got bollards, physically protecting shops, cameras everywhere, smoke bombs that go off when people come into the store, safe rooms in the shops, all sorts of things that are designed to protect them from threats, which are coming thick and fast.
Mm-hmm. Really puts it into perspective. So, Dale, on your end at JTI, what are you doing in the battle against illicit tobacco?
So, combating the illegal tobacco trade is one of JTI's top priorities. And to do this, we've created the It Costs More Than You Think campaign, which is centered around a microsite. The microsite offers retailers the opportunity to go on, understand the issue of the illegal tobacco trade across the country. It offers consumers the chance to go on, understand how to spot the illegal tobacco trade within their own communities, and most importantly, how to report it to the authorities. The other thing from a retail perspective is that if they go on there, they can understand how they can work through the fact sheets and the data that we provide to create information to share with their local MPs and government officials. So all in all, it's a really good central platform for all of these different stakeholders to go on, understand what it is the illegal tobacco trade is, what impact it is having on their communities, and what they, as an individual, can do about it.
Definitely. And the upcoming changes with legislation and tax increases, what impact is that going to have on the market, and what can be done to clamp down on it?
Well, again, retailers, they're telling us, they're concerned about the tobacco and vapes bill. They're concerned that, in an area where there's already increased acts of aggression and threats of violence towards retail staff, that at a point where, ID checks is a flashpoint for acts of aggression and acts of threats against retail staff. And at some point in the future where you're having to identify a 35-year-old over a 34-year-old to, effectively ID someone for tobacco in the future, wherein obviously other products still remain at 18, there's going to be potential flashpoints there. And then the other question is, they aren't necessarily going to be adhering to the same rules and regulations that honest retailers are going to be adhering to in our country. So, we need to be mindful of that. In the same way as taxation, overtaxation is only going to cause a further disparity between legitimate retail pricing and, those retailers who are selling illegal tobacco products. If a legal tobacco product costs £4.50, which, some of our, test purchasing has uncovered, and the taxation continues to rise, that gap is only going to get big. And this year alone, in October, we're expecting, obviously, the double taxation coming in the autumn's budget, which will be the standard 2% tax increase on tobacco plus a one-off tax increase. So you could be seeing an additional £1.20 on a pack of 20, or £2.50 plus on a 30-gram RYO. Those price increases are not going to impact the illegal trade. They're going to remain at their price points. We're going to see legitimate retailers jump up in price. So it's just going to drive further consumers towards the illegal market, potentially those who haven't even considered it in the past. So it really is, to coin a phrase, like you're handing the keys of the kingdom to the illegal trade. And again, that's something that we need to ask the government to do more to protect honest retailers up and down the country. And there are things that we can do. And, JTI are calling for, along with retail partners, to investigate, licensing scheme or on-the-spot fines of £10,000. There was a real credible £10,000 on-the-spot fine for those caught selling illegal tobacco products in their high street. That is something that will put illegal retailers off potentially doing it. And that money that could be reinvested into trading standards and reinvested into, the administration of that scheme there. So they're the kind of things that we would absolutely be calling for from a JTI perspective.
Thanks, Dale. And Rohan, back in Australia, you've touched on how rife it is. What mistakes did we see over there that led to get to that point, and how can we avoid them here in the UK?
Well, we haven't got enough time here, Nathan, to talk about all the mistakes that Australia's actually made on this issue. But I would just reiterate what Dale said about the importance of calling out wrong policies here in the UK. And I think that was one of the key mistakes that we made. And perhaps looking back, we underestimated the problem. We just didn't take it seriously enough from the start. And I think there's a chance that that's happening here in the UK. But thanks to people like you who are now raising awareness of the issue and really raising an alarm that this has now hit the high street and it's growing. And it couldn't get to that trigger point that Australia did, where the entire market went to illicit. So it's great that the companies and manufacturers are activating policies and online regimes and yourself. But the retailers themselves can really get behind this. So there are things that they can do. They might be just a lone voice out there in the wilderness, but there are 5,000, 10,000 of them, and collectively they can make a big difference. So if I was them, I'd be calling out the local police to say, why are you walking past that shop? That there's clearly a front for organised crime. Local trading standards, get them on board. Local media, tell them what's happening in their street and how it affects their business. And obviously the local politicians who are part of the decision-making and policy-making process. So not only does the enforcement have to increase around this, but the policy has to change. You can't have, well, the enforcement's going to be ineffective without actually changing the key driver of this from the start.
Thanks, Rohan. And Dale, I think it's important that every retailer knows this. How if they see or know of a retailer in the area selling illegal tobacco, how do they go about reporting that?
So I think one of the things I would definitely say as well, I've spent a bit of time to say we would tell, but the Fed retailers that we've spoken to over the last year, in the district councils and at the Fed events, they've already expressed a very clear understanding about the issue in their own areas. They see it, they understand it. And I think, as I said earlier, that the challenge will always be making sure they don't feel alone in that fight. I think what Rowan's just underlined there, this is exactly what we're talking about. We'd continue to ask them to call out the illegal trade in their areas, engage with the platform, engage with their business advisor, that's JTI sales rep, if they do have any concerns or questions. If they go onto the It Costs Me When You Think campaign, or if any of their customers go onto It Costs Me When You Think, the website, you can find their ways to report the illegal trade within your community, whether that be through trading standards, HMRC, through Crime Stoppers, ways to do it anonymously. Because something that we have looked at in the past is, we have been out there, we have done research with consumers as well as retailers. And one of the elements that always comes through is the fear of repercussions for reporting illegal trade, illegal organizations within their communities. It's on your doorstep. There's going to be that concern, but we want to encourage people to be able to do that without that fear of repercussion through the anonymous sources that we have. And then from a retail perspective, again, just continue to fight the fight that they're doing so admirably out there. Continue to speak to your council, continue to speak to your MP when you get the opportunity to do so, to raise the concerns that you have. You are, very much from a retail perspective and a community perspective, the backbone of community, celebrated at times from our government through COVID, the heart of the community when people couldn't get to stores because obviously everything was starting to shut down, times like that where the retail community celebrated. So the government need to do more to support that retail community. They need to do more to support local businesses and small, medium enterprises. That's what the heart of our UK economy should be about. And so I think there's always more we can ask retailers to do. They do so much already. Just continue to do that. And what we'd ask for, more support from the community, more support from the government, and together really kind of help us tackle what is a really big issue on the UK high street in our communities. And what we've already addressed is a £2 billion black hole in the treasury, in our economy, that if we are able to repatriate and get back, will make a significant difference to our UK economy.
Absolutely. And Ron, just to wrap up, obviously incredibly experienced. Have you got any final thoughts on where we're heading in the UK in the battle against illicit tobacco?
Yeah, well, I'm just hoping that you're not sleepwalking into the disaster that Australia has found ourselves in. Dale mentioned HMRC. I think I just wanted to speak about that for a second, that people look at the border authorities as that they'll hold back the tide, but this is a tsunami of product that's coming in. It's unrealistic to think that they're going to solve it alone, or even with an increase in resources there. So the HMRC are part of the solution. They're also part of the problem. So they have significantly underestimated the illicit trade, and it's their voice that is being listened to by government. So if they say the illicit trade's only 13% of the market, that won't alert or alarm the government or encourage them to respond in a robust way, which is really required. So they need to get a far more accurate figure than that. But I would also, again, reiterate what Dale said about the high street. It's a uniquely British institution that should be celebrated and protected. And I wouldn't underestimate, the joy that brings, and just the identity that brings to the British public. So it needs to be protected more than it currently is. And you certainly don't want to end up where Australia is, where shopping centres are just rife with crime from top to bottom. And that's just a national embarrassment.
Thank you so much, Dale. Ron, thank you very much for joining us today. To the retailers that have tuned in, if you would like to see some more information and insight onto the illicit trade, visit itcostmorethanyoutthink.co.uk. You'll also find information on how to report there. But thanks for tuning in and have a great day.